Now we will be looking at another very important, in fact, one of my most favorite, if not the most favorite performance management tool. I think it's quite effective. It's Porter's five forces. So let's have a quick look. You do have, I'm sure you've encountered Porter's five forces in your studies, and this is essentially the five different areas that Porter identified as the most important and critical when you want to analyze industry forces particular to your market. So if you're in automobile, then you're looking at your own industry, right? So this is a little more micro. It's not macro like pest, but it's more focused into your industry, whatever your industry is. And what you do is you look at each of these five forces. You call them forces, you call them factors, whatever, areas, scope, whatever. What you do is you identify in under each of those forces, you see how strong is that force against you. So the five forces by and itself are competitive rivalry or competition, threat from potential entrants, threat from substitute, buyer's bargaining power, and supplier bargaining power. Now, in terms of deciding how strong the force is, it's not really rocket science, because there are, when you identify a particular force, there are ways of determining the strength of that force. So, for example, if you look at something like competitive rivalry, what you can do is you can look at factors such as market share, market growth, and market capacity. So, if you, for instance, if you see that your company compared to your market share, there is another company, company Y, which has a massive market share and they've consistently shown excellent growth, then you are looking at a very strong competitor against you. And in such a case, you're basically determining that competitive rivalry is high, quite high. You could be, in an industry, you could be a really stagnant player, and there could be a situation where a new entrant, very powerful, like maybe backed by someone like Adani or Tata or Elon Musk, who is entering your industry, right? So in that case, if you look at something like threat from potential new entrants, you're looking at brand value, customer loyalty, recognition, percentage of revenue protected by patents, etc. But what you're looking at is how exactly, or what is the positioning of this new entrant. It's a strong play. Let's say someone like Jeff Bezos is backing it up, and it's under the Amazon umbrella. So you're looking at a really strong player. You know that they, for at least 5 years, they're ready to lose money if that's what it takes for them to acquire market share, and that means that the threat from the new entrant is quite high, right? It's a fair assessment, but what you need to be careful is that it requires judgment. So that's where you need to be careful, and the factors that help you to determine the strength of the force under each of these, like the examples that have been given here, the examples here, it's not an exhaustive list. That's all what I want to say, right? It depends on your situation, it depends on the circumstance. In the APM exam, if you get a situation where five forces are being looked at, not all the forces will be looked at. What will happen is that either one of these, they'll put you in a situation where one of these forces is in play, and you'll have to really come up with a strategy against it, determine how strong, what kind of influence this will exert on our sales, that sort of thing. So you would be analyzing and evaluating the impact of one, maximum two force, which means that you will have to be able to really look at a particular force and see what the examiner is sharing about it in terms of information, and use that information to determine how strong the force is operating against you, whether it's weak, whether it's strong, and depending on that, strategize your response. How exactly are you going to tackle this? That is the kind of skill that is required. In the context of performance management, when you conduct a five forces assessment, you have, by and in itself, you're looking at things like how do you measure the strength of the force, because it's good if you can quantify, but it's not necessary, and it's also not easy. How reliable whatever metrics you're using are, because I mean, if your measurements are wrong, and if you're making, that means that your assessment will be wrong. You might determine that a strong force is weak because you measured the wrong thing. You didn't take them seriously when you should have. So you can't let that happen. How to manage the forces identified and suitable performance indicators and targets to monitor the forces. So KPIs, performance measurements, and mechanisms to keep reviewing and monitoring them. There's an example. So that is how Porter's five forces essentially gets used. It's a good exercise for you to try. Just come up with any company, right? Just think that you're in that company. Think that you're working for General Motors, and analyze your industry around you. Analyze the industry where Toyota and Ford and Tesla and Porsche and uh, VW and all these companies exist. So think about that industry and think that you're General Motors. And in such a case, try to analyze from your perspective, how's competition? Is it high? How's the threat of bargain? How's the threat of new entrants? How's the threat of substitutes? Are there really substitutes? Now I hear that Apple and Apple is also developing a car. AI systems are being developed. Self-driving methods are improving, etc., etc. So how exactly do you see that as a substitute for your products? Electric vehicles are increasing. Look at the supplier bargaining power and the customer bargaining power. Can they really bargain with you, or is the price point that you determine is what gets sold at? So how much power do you have in respect to your suppliers and your customers? So when you think like that, you will slowly start to be able to cultivate that skill of determining and judging intuitively and automatically, sensibly, of how exactly this works and how to use Porter's five forces as a effective tool. As I said, it's one of my favorites because I've used it a lot, and it's a good way of thinking. It really helps you identify, because we don't really do macro work, right? Macro is macro. Macro is uncontrollable most of the time. But industry, whenever we are launching a business or whenever we do analysis work, we look at the industry very closely. We look at other competitors, especially. We look at the supply chain. When we do that, you cannot really move forward with your analysis. And just as the other tools, it helps you identify critical success factors, it helps you develop KPIs, etc. So all that can be done using Porter's five forces as well, especially from an industry angle. So it is quite effective in all these fronts. Good luck, and I'll see you in a different video.